And I'm Guy, and this is your home for everything Alberta independence, as well as the downfall of Canada, especially the road Mark Carney has been going down lately.
Exactly. But before we start, thank you so much for joining us today. Please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much to everybody that has subscribed. It really does help us out. Also, we try to read most, if not all of your comments live after each segment. However, we do prioritize super chats and those help us out a lot as well. And we have memberships. Thank you so much to all our members too.
And I see we have a couple comments. Why don't we get into that before we get to Stay Free Alberta?
Yes. Silverfeed, hello, and thank you for being here and for waving. And Beulah Hillier, hello, and also thank you for being here. It says, hi everyone watching from Innisfail, Alberta. It's hot here today. It's kind of been cloudy here in Mexico. Well, cloudier than usual here in Mexico City, but.
And was it Steve Savaro that wrote the book? Because he sent us the message.
Stephen Jensen.
Oh, Stephen Jensen wrote a book on Alberta independence, and I'm going to get more information on it. I seen the message come in. I just wasn't able to read it because I was busy gathering a ton of stories today.
But I do know yesterday a lot of people did show a lot of interest in it, so that's a great thing. Actually.
Absolutely.
And thank you for Steve for sharing everything that he's been doing. He's been doing quite a lot, from putting up flags to being on apparently every single live stream, and also being out there talking to people, making songs, doing the books.
Yeah, he's been a big help to this channel as well. So thanks to Stephen Jensen.
Thank you so much to Stephen Jensen. And I think that is it. Over in Ayumbili, nobody's here yet, but should we start?
Let's do it.
Sure. We know that there has been a lot of talk about the trade war that now Carney has wanted to implement on essentially Canada and Canadian citizens, but against the US because of the tariffs. However, Alberta seems to continue to be getting embroiled, but also helping with the independence with this whole talk of what's going to happen with the oil.
Many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And Alberta has been positioned essentially at the center and taking center stage more and more, as both Doug Ford and apparently Mark Carney too are threatening to cut off oil from the US.
Well, the big question here is, Alberta going to become collateral damage in Mark Carney's trade war here? Does he want to try to use this oil as leverage? We know he's trying to interfere in the midterms at this point.
Western Standard says, quote, Smith says cutting off Alberta's energy exports is not a viable option.
Yeah, and this is the right stance to take, obviously, but I have two questions. Is she taking this stance because of the Alberta independence movement, knowing if she took the Canada First approach, which every single other premier is taking, that would push more people towards the polls to vote for independence? That's number one. Number two, how much control does she actually have over the oil? Obviously, all these pipelines from Alberta go into the United States, British Columbia, and other provinces. That gives the federal government a ton of control and say on what happens with the oil, which is a shame because I actually like this stance and I would love for Alberta to protect its oil and build a good relationship with the United States.
But there's also a big misconception that Alberta's oil is essentially Canada's oil. However, there has been talk by Keith Wilson and others, lawyer Keith Wilson, saying that in fact, no, it is not Canada's oil. Alberta actually got a lot of rights to their own oil a while ago.
Alberta has all the rights to the oil, and that's the thing. Not until it crosses over these borders does the federal government get federal control, and it's implementing more and more federal control with these MOUs and these deals that basically Danielle Smith is signing away the economic sovereignty of Alberta at this point, and I don't like to see it. She's also paying retroactive carbon taxes on oil that's already been coming out of the ground that there was no carbon tax on.
And yet we see those that don't really care about Alberta and, however, are trying to fight against its independence by doing the exact opposite, like Jason Kenney, disgraced former Premier of Alberta. Global News says, quote, former Premier Jason Kenney is questioning why Alberta is taking oil and gas off the table in the high-stakes tariffs war with the United States, saying Canada has the power to really put the squeeze on America through energy exports.
Well, and I brought this particular article up and to point out not only Jason Kenney, but this is Naheed Nenshi, this is Doug Ford, this is the Canada First approach that every single other premier has. And if by some miracle the Federalists win on October 19th, I have a feeling Danielle Smith may want to take this exact same approach. This is absolutely ridiculous. You start a real energy war with the United States, it is not going to end well for Canadian citizens, for provinces, or for anybody else.
And especially for those that want to shackle Alberta still to Canada, because I think this is giving a great view of what actually happens when Alberta stays within Canada. It is used as leverage, and without really thinking of the consequences or who they're affecting, the people themselves, the citizens themselves.
Well, it's not just used as leverage. It's used, period. It's used for remittance payments. It's used to fund Canada, and it's used as leverage in a trade war with its oil and other natural resources. And on top of that, it's constantly being restricted, so it can't develop that leverage even if it wanted to.
But there's also further and further talk of Alberta's oil, maybe even Alberta itself, becoming collateral damage during this trade war that is essentially self-waged by Canada against the US. We see here from the Western Standard saying, quote, Alberta oil risks becoming collateral damage in Ottawa's trade war.
Now, I personally think this is a bunch of malarkey. Everybody knows the Alberta pipelines run into the United States, go all the way across the United States and back up to the Laurentian elites in Ottawa and Quebec. So the United States has just as much opportunity to turn off those pipelines as the federal government does. But this is the federalist approach, trying to act like they have fake leverage when they don't have any leverage. The United States is the one with all the leverage. And it seems to me, after all the leaks coming out from the American administration, they offered Canada the best deal of any nation on earth at this point. Now what I'm thinking is going to happen after the midterms, there's a good chance Donald Trump is going to take revenge for this foreign interference of Mark Carney in the midterms, cancel the USMCA, announce a bilateral deal with Mexico, and really put the punishment on Canada.
And the thing is, Canada, during all the brandish talk about saying, oh, but I'm the best negotiator, and saying, that said Mark Carney, I'm going to make the best deal with the US. And that is essentially how he got elected, on the elbows up. I'll do whatever it takes for Canada. Didn't enter official trade negotiations like Mexico did, and hasn't entered them either at this point before he started waging this war against the US. So we don't even know fully what was said in those meetings, what was offered in those meetings from either side, and why they actually broke down.
Well, this is the dirty little secret Canada doesn't want to get out. It did leak out on one mainstream media outlet at the very beginning, but it was never mentioned again. And that was one of the terms Canada wanted to build into this deal, that they were responding to the 50% tariff from the United States, was to enter into official negotiations. And why is that important? Because you can put snapbacks and standstills in those negotiations. Those are mechanisms to protect Canada from future tariff threats from Donald Trump or the United States. The fact that they were never in official negotiations is the reason they were never allotted those protections.
But a lot of these premiers, and Mark Carney included, seem to forget how the oil and the transportation actually works, and why trying to use it as leverage against the US might not be such a good idea. Kirk Lubimov says, quote, I need to sober up some of the people in Eastern Canada and Ontario Premier Doug Ford and the elbows up crowd who is calling on Canada to cut oil shipments to the US or increase taxes. First of all, it's Alberta's oil, not Canada's. Get that through your thick skulls. Second of all, it's you in the Eastern Canada that imports oil and petroleum products from the US via the US. You are literally dependent on it.
Yeah, and again, if this trade war gets out of control, meaning they don't come to a deal before the midterms and Donald Trump wants revenge after the midterms, Mark Carney may declare the Emergencies Act at some point to bestow more power into the federal government's hands when it comes to oil and a lot of other things.
Further power. And again, it is Alberta's independence that is at the crux of all of this, because it is an existential threat. And we are seeing now why Alberta further is more important for the federal government, because they use it as leverage as well, not just amongst provinces with payments that go out to every single other province except Alberta, but also against the US, for example.
Well, this is why October 19th is so crucially important now more than ever. We need to send a message to Ottawa saying, don't interfere in Alberta, don't interfere in our sovereignty, don't try to use our oil as leverage. We have a good trade relationship with the United States. Currently, as it sits, it's Ottawa, Quebec, and BC that's most affected by this tariff war, not Alberta. It's the federal government that wants to drag Alberta through its oil pipelines and other trade mechanisms into this trade war.
However, we do see, and we did see, Doug Ford being very brash about, we're going to cut energy, because Ottawa is one of the most affected provinces by these tariffs being waged by the US and Trump. However, he doesn't seem to really know much of anything, really. Table Salt says, quote, Doug Ford discovers that Canadian oil is shipped through the US back to Canada, saying, quote, I have to give credit to Danielle Smith. She came up with these ideas to reroute Canadian oil through Canada. This is unbelievable. They didn't know about this massive risk.
This is absolutely insane what's coming out of Doug Ford's mouth. The fact that he's threatening oil and he didn't even know the Americans are the ones that can shut off the oil to Eastern Canada at this point. And he starts talking about some pie in the sky dream of a west to east coast pipeline. That's decades long pipeline, especially with First Nations, other provinces, the federal government. I mean, you name it, everybody's going to want to cut. That will take decades to build. This trade war will be well over by then. And if you start building that pipeline after this trade war kind of ends, if a deal comes to fruition, the Americans aren't going to like it very much. And the Americans own 70% of Canadian oil.
Smith on Monday. She's obviously still opposed to that idea. From your point of view, how did that conversation go? And is there anything you think you can do to get her on board with your approach?
Well, we had a great conversation. We get along quite well. We may disagree on certain items, but I'm going to be flying out there to pay her a visit. You know, this is why we need, the pipeline. We've needed this for 50 years, going from west over to east. And we're going to work on that. We're going to work collaboratively with Alberta and Premier Wab Kinew. We have to get his approval, and Scott Moe, and everyone has to work together. I'm confident that's going to happen. But Premier Smith came up with some great ideas. Right now, we're getting our fuel and our natural gas coming down to the U.S. and coming back up to Canada. Craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. And the natural gas coming from Pennsylvania.
Craziest thing you ever heard in your life. Everybody in Western Canada already knows this. The fact that you're running your mouth off, making this trade war worse and worse, and you don't even know how these pipelines generally run from Alberta to the United States and back up to the east, which gives America a ton of leverage over Canada when it comes to its own oil. On top of that, like I just said, the Americans own 70% of Canadian oil.
Coming up, well, we already have an existing pipeline, so we're going to reroute that, and we won't have to be reliant on the U.S. Isn't that amazing that we have energy sovereignty? Once we build this pipeline, we won't have to rely on anyone in the entire world. And that's our plan, and we're going to go as quickly as possible. So we get along very well. Again, we may differ on a couple things, but we have a strong plan. And I got to give Premier Smith the credit. She was the one who came up with these ideas, that rerouting this natural gas line, and eventually rerouting Line 5 as well.
Absolutely ridiculous. I mean, this is a pie in the sky dream. This is a decade, maybe even 2 decades, if they even get it started at this point. And as soon as the trade war ends, they're going to stop talking about that east to west coast pipeline, because it's just too hard to get federal projects, especially large federal projects like this one, done in Canada because of Mark Carney and the Liberals.
And especially pipelines, we've already seen that the construction of them always get halted because of approvals by every single premier, approvals by the federal government, approvals by the First Nation, consultation periods. Then protesters come out, and then nothing ever gets done and just gets halted to please those that do continue to use fear and fear-mongering about oil and what's going to happen to the climate against these kinds of projects. So this probably will never get built. And if they manage to shackle Alberta to Canada, then it's going to be even less favorable for Alberta itself.
Yeah, there's other pipelines that are possible, but this east to west coast mega pipeline dream that Doug Ford is pitching as a solution to the Canadian public, they have no other solutions. That's why he's pitching this pie in the sky dream that will never happen as a solution.
And that's the thing, the utopian thinking of, oh, but we could do this and this. Meanwhile, currently, there isn't much no leverage for Canada, and yet they're threatening the U.S. with a bunch of different things, saying we're going to cut off our energy and our oil towards you. You can't, because that means you're cutting it off from yourself. Chuck Prendelli says, quote, Canada produces 6 million barrels of oil a day. Most of that flows through the companies wearing a Canadian flag. Look at who actually owns them. Imperial Oil is 69.6% owned by ExxonMobil. ConocoPhillips Canada is 100% U.S. owned. Chevron Canada is 100% U.S. owned. 70% of Canada's oil wealth ends up in America, and Canada just keeps 30%.
And we can take a quick look at this chart. And the important thing to see here is that little Canadian flag at the top that says 30%, and the American flag that says 70%. That indicates 70% of the oil coming out out of Canada is already owned by the United States. And this is why Mark Carney wants carbon taxes and all kinds of other taxes put on oil pipelines. So he can get his cut and more of a cut every year before profits are kind of handed out to the US or Canada or to whoever else.
And even as Canada does own, the U.S. does own about 70% of Canada's oil, or at least ends up with it, they're also diversifying, and they're also looking at other avenues to get that oil, and not just including Venezuela, but many others too.
Well, they own that 70% because they invested in Canada when there wasn't these onerous restrictions in Canada that the Liberals put up. You're not going to see any kind of investment coming into Canada right now, except from one individual, and that is the Canadian federal government. You're seeing the federalization of not only natural resources, but you're going to see it in a lot of other sectors very soon.
And right now, Alberta being in the middle and being used as leverage once again, because it always ends up that way. Well, the talk of independence, and hopefully so on October 19th, will actually see a bigger response to the premiers, to Mark Carney, to Canada itself and the federal government, saying we can use Alberta just as leverage because we'll always have them, not including the existential threat of them leaving. Well, I hope more and more people realize that it is essentially up to Alberta at this point.
Well, the federal government wants to use Alberta as leverage. What Albertans want is freedom. And on October 19th, they're going to have the opportunity to get that freedom, or at least the first step to go towards a binding referendum here.
And we will continue to fight and support Alberta's independence. In the meantime, please don't forget to subscribe. It really does help us out, and like the video because that also really helps us out. And now let's get back into the comments before we move on to the next segment. Where are we? Teresa Freedom, hello. Thank you for being here. It says, hi, y'all, from Calgary. 32 degrees here right now.
Oh, wow.
That's too hot for me. Teresa Freedom says, did you see Danielle?
Yeah.
Today?
Well, we've been kind of showing a bunch of her clips. She has the right stance, but I think the independence movement is the one pushing her towards that stance.
Because Teresa says, have you seen her update on the tariff earlier today?
Maybe not. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the update was because I did see a couple updates, but...
Sean Vision, hello, says, good evening, everyone. John B says, China is doomed. China's liberal party needs to be kicked out.
Yeah, Canada has a few masters at this point, and it's becoming very obvious that those masters want to use Canada as leverage against the United States in the midterms. They have the EU and the globalists. They have Xi Jinping in China. We're going to get into that again a little bit later, as well as a lot of other people putting pressure on Canada, like the Democrats in the United States who are being hired in mass into the Mark Carney administration right now.
And Jacqueline Lear, hello. Thank you for being here. Says Doug Ford, stay out of Alberta. You knew this before because Daniel Smith informed you all. And John B says, it's 118 Fahrenheit in Phoenix right now. I don't know what that means.
Oh, that's very, very, very hot. Okay. Anytime it gets over 100, because I know the Fahrenheit system actually better than the Celsius system, it's hot.
And Beulah says it's 29 in Innisfail. So it is hot everywhere, apparently, except here in Mexico City. It's actually kind of cold.
Yeah, we already fled Canada, and it seems like it's colder here sometimes than it is up there.
Exactly. And, Teresa asks again, did we see the update on the tariffs earlier today?
Well, if she can give us the update, because I have a couple articles about it later, but I'm not sure if it's the same update, because there's been a lot coming out from Alberta, from Danielle Smith, Doug Ford, the federal government as well.
But now let's get into Mark Carney and his Liberal Party. Mark Carney does seem to be wanting to maybe possibly interfere in the U.S. midterms by waging this trade war at this exact moment, and it seems like it might have been further planned than many want to believe.
Liberal, happy fun, la la la.
And let's start with this from Mario Zelaya saying,
well,
quote,
and before we kind of get into this, one thing I'll say here is this is foreign interference by the Canadian government. It's very obvious at this point, and we're going to kind of lay this out bit by bit.
Marzali says, quote, major breaking, Breitbart exposes the Democrat network in Carney's government. Maya Johnson, and we have been talking about this as well, COO of the Prime Minister's office, first person to ever hold the title, American, Hillary Clinton's director of scheduling in 2016, Biden campaign strategic consultant, also serves as senior special advisor for, quote, U.S. stakeholder strategy. John Podesta facilitated a private meeting between Carney, Barack Obama, and George Soros at Obama's May 2026 Toronto speech. The Nova Scotia meetings weeks later with Industry Minister Melanie Joly, George Soros, his wife, Frank McKenna, the chair of Brookfield, Carney built a Democrat war room inside the Canadian Prime Minister's office and negotiated with a Republican president. The result is exactly what you'd expect.
Yeah, it looks like the Democrats are running a full-on campaign for the midterms through Canada and Mark Carney here. It's not just the individuals being hired into the PMO office that used to work for Hillary Clinton. There's quite a few hirings being made, and there's a ton of advisors coming up to Canada right now to advise Mark Carney, and they're all associated with the Democratic Party. And that's only the first level of concern. Then you have the globalists in the EU also wanting Trump out, trying to weaponize Canada for that means. And then you have China giving out statements again. They love the Canadian strategy of weaponizing Canada against the United States.
And Breitbart says, quote, Democrats appear to be colluding with Canada's anti-Trump government. And could that also be because a lot of the war machine that the Democrats had in USAID and a lot of that money handling has been fully now cut off?
Well, that's the thing. Trump cut off USAID money. They're having a real struggle. Maybe a lot of that money is being laundered into Canada where they can't get their hands or eyes on it, so they don't know what's happening. And that's why they have the strategists in Canada creating a war room for the midterm elections.
And we're not the only people noticing this. CBC Watcher says, quote, CBC's David Common says a quiet part out loud, saying, quote, look at this map of Trump swing states. Darker colors mean more Canadian tariff pain. Michigan, Iowa, Ohio, and Maine, perfect for flipping those closed Senate races and deciding Trump's control of Washington.
Well, and this is crazy. When the mainstream media is talking about this, they're literally talking about foreign interference. And then it's the Canadian government that wants to claim foreign interference in the Alberta independence movement, which is absolutely ridiculous, especially with the level of transparency the Alberta independence movement has had with every single dollar.
Map out a lot about where that pressure is coming from. Take a look at the map that shows which states are facing an outsized impact. Look, for instance, at Michigan or Iowa. The darker the color, the more the impact. And these are two states in particular where Senate races in those midterm elections are very, very close, where Trump's control over Washington will ultimately be decided by those November midterms. Let's drill down into the states themselves. Iowa, we do a lot of farm machinery trade with Iowa. Total value is $6.5 billion. This impacts about close to 10% of the trade. If we move on to our next state.
And pause it for a moment. They're literally talking about how we can interfere in the American elections, how Canada is going to have an impact because of this tariff war. This is absolutely ridiculous at this point. If it was the opposite way around.
But that's absolutely obvious.
Are looking at Texas, big state. Not a huge percentage, but a very large value. And of course, plastics as well as fossil fuels, generally a big part of Canada's trade. Let's move on now to Maine. Lobster goes there for processing, or rather comes to Canada for processing. And so it is a major percentage of the impact. And counter tariffs appear to be meant to weaken the Republicans' tentative hold on the Senate seat there. Let's turn to Michigan, border state closely tied to Canada's
Did you say tariffs are meant to weaken them in Maine so they can lose a seat?
Industry to the integrated auto industry, again, significant percentage. Trump's tariffs already costing U.S. automakers billions of dollars. Canada's retaliation will add to that. Lastly, let's look at Ohio. It is a key swing state. Trump promises to use tariffs to bring back steel and heavy industry jobs. He claims it is key to his hold on the state. Canada targeting that. Speaking of Ohio, let's bring in Marianne, who's been looking much more closely at some of the political implications of what can be a bellwether in U.S. political circles.
Yeah, so to really drive home this message that for Ohio, Canada is its largest international trade partner, exporting billions of goods north of the border, as you noted, particularly when it comes to manufacturing and even agriculture. But with the midterm elections just coming up, they are potentially going to see a sway in votes because the tariffs a huge issue there, particularly for those workers in those industrial areas. To give everyone a sense of background, this is a red state. It is traditionally a Republican stronghold. President Trump won there for the last three elections. Its governor and senators, all Republican. But the hope for the Democrats is that as workers there start to feel that pain when it comes to the prices and the job impact there, as they start to feel really the effects.
And pause it just for a second. What's going to happen if the Americans get their elbows up and they really want to hollow out Canada at this point? So far, this is simply a business deal. It's a fly to the Americans. But what happens if Donald Trump wins the midterms? He has about $1 billion to spend. The polls, I think, even though they say they favor the Democrats, a lot of those polls are actually paid for by the Democrats. And we've seen what happened in 2024. It was too big to rig.
As counter tariffs, they could tap into that, potentially flip the state.
I mean, as you know, Ohio is so critical to the auto industry. Trump has been quite popular among some in the state in saying, no, we're going to bring all that auto manufacturing back into the United States. But generally, now that there are tariffs, reciprocal tariffs, the threat of reciprocal tariffs, where do things stand for Ohioan?
My God. I mean, this is a clip that the Americans need to watch and understand. Canada is really starting to become a threat. They're starting to interfere, not only in the midterms, but if they're willing to do this in the midterms, I can only imagine they have something up their sleeve for the 2028 election with J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio.
But speaking of J.D. Vance, interestingly enough, we have seen him campaigning on this in Maine, for example, doing speeches about how Canada's new trade war and elbows up strategy does affect them and explaining how it affects the workers of Maine. And I'm guessing they're going to be going to a lot of these other states to fully explain what was being done by Canada, how Canada had been taking advantage of a lot of the workers in those states specifically, and why, while there's a short amount of pain and the short term, maybe in the long term, being able to bring back a lot of that industry, being able to not be reliant on that trade with Canada if Canada is going to be putting its elbows up for a long time, might be best.
Well, and this is, I think, a dirty little secret as well. The Canadians don't want the Americans to know. In the short term, there may be a little bit of pain, not very much, but in the long term, a lot of those industries are going to be hollowed out and moved to those northern states. And there's going to be a massive boom if this trade war continues for a long time.
And as Canada and Carney have continuously said that they want to get closer and closer and build a better relationship, not just with China, which might have been a big sticking point in this trade war that now Canada is waging, but also with the EU, and saying that they want to partner, maybe even enter the EU, which might explain why there's so much focus now and continues to be so much focus on the European Union. Arpan Khanna says, quote, Carney says Canada is at quote unquote war. Then why is he addressing Europe's parliament and not Canada's? Canadians deserve answers from their prime minister, recall Canada's parliament. And also, we haven't seen, once again, I've been saying it, we haven't seen a transparent version of why the trade talks broke down from the Canadian side. Some things have been coming out from the US side. A lot of things have been coming out from the U.S.-Mexico talks, but nothing really from what happened really during the informal trade talks.
Well, I think the EU is looking at this as an opportunity to hurt Trump in the midterms. And if it works, they want to probably implement a similar strategy in 2028. We know how Trump has really pushed the globalists to the absolute brink. And if we can follow it up with the J.D. Vance and the Marco Rubio in 2028, that's going to be it for their globalist utopia dream. They're looking at this as a way to kind of push back on Trump, I think, and they're using Carney and the Canadian people as that leverage.
Yes, says Carney, to address European Parliament and attend the State of the Union address. Because that makes the most sense right now, to leave Canada as you actually are leaving Canada at war almost by itself. But next, Rebel News also says Chinese state media praises Carney's, quote, Chinese-styled counterattack against Trump. And we have been talking about how it was just China and Canada that were the only ones that were trying to fight and wage war against Trump's tariffs. The state-run media outlet portrayed the comparison as a compliment, arguing Carney's actions demonstrate the necessity and legitimacy of China's own retaliatory approach to the Trump administration.
Trump has the globalist, has China, has everybody on their back foot right now. And I think both China, the EU, the Democrats in the United States are a little bit dazed and confused, and they're looking at Canada as this is a potential way to sacrifice a pawn, being Canada, in order to get a little leverage in the midterms, which is absolutely ridiculous, because ultimately, who does it hurt the most? It doesn't hurt Mark Carney because he's completely invested in the United States, 91% of his assets. It hurts the Canadian people, and especially the Canadian working class.
And also, let's not forget that Canada has been praising and very blatant and blunt about their strategic partnership and how they're getting closer to China, and how that might be one of the sticking points as to why the trade talks broke down. The inability of Canada to say, okay, we'll backtrack a little bit on this strategic partnership that we thought was a great idea. Canada also not coming out great, even with trade with China, because some tariffs were imposed after they announced this strategic partnership. But Mexico, on the other hand, being the mirror to Canada during these trade talk negotiations with the U.S., going into official formal negotiations, but also being able to get rid of a lot of the Chinese investment and China talk that was being had during those meetings. And lastly, Eric Doherty says, quote, Scott Bessent is just staring into Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney for trying to screw over America.
Yeah, and this is fantastic to see because everything the EU is doing through Canada, China is doing through Canada, heck, even the Democrats are using Canada against the United States for the midterms right now. They see right through it, and the statement from Scott Bessent is kind of a tell to that. Trump is going to enact vengeance after those midterms, I believe, and it's going to really, really hurt Canada at that point.
On Canada to become a state, he did say that they're getting all the benefits of being a state without being one.
I think he would like Canada to come to the table and negotiate in good faith. They were offered quite a good deal last week. They chose to reject it. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Carney rose to power on an anti-American, anti-Trump platform. I believe he was more than 20 points behind. And he seems to have gone back to his old playbook. And I think one has to ask oneself, is he trying to benefit himself, the Liberal Party, or the Canadian people? Because they were offered a very good job. So, yep.
Want Canada to become a state.
And I think what he's saying there is definitely a tell. They know what's up. And the best deal Canada could have got was before the midterms. That would have given a little bump to the economy. I don't think a big bump, but a little bump. And that would have helped. Now that they did this so publicly, it's basically a slap in the face to the Americans and Trump. After these midterms, I fully expect a bilateral trade deal with Mexico and possibly for the announcement of the cancellation of the USMCA, which that means the clock is ticking. You have 6 months after that point, and Canada is going to have to come to the table then, and they're going to have virtually no leverage at that point.
Exactly. And however, Canada might be being used as a pawn and as the leverage between a larger, broader war between the middling powers, or the middle powers, as Carney likes to call them, and the U.S. in a way to basically attack the U.S., especially as this is coming right before the midterms and might actually hurt a lot of things. But don't forget to subscribe. Again, it really does help us out. And also like the video. Thank you so much. And now let's go back to your comments because I do see there's quite a few. So thank you so much. Teresa Freedom says, just emailed it to you. Oh, thank you.
Okay. We don't have time to read it live on the air right now, but I'll read it after and then we'll discuss it on the next show.
Yes. John B says, the polls lie all the time, guy. Yes.
Well, absolutely.
That's what they're for.
Well, absolutely. And there was a whistleblower that came out of the Kamala Harris campaign recently saying the internal polling, not the public polling that's kind of paid for. The public polling said Kamala Harris was winning all the way through. Privately, they knew there wasn't a single poll that was legitimate that had her winning.
John B says the Prime Minister has been deceiving Canadians. It's very sad. And using them again as pawns in this stupid, basically one-sided war, because the U.S. only went to war as well or retaliated further because Canada wasn't sitting down to talk.
Absolutely.
John B says America's going to need J.D. Vance Rubio 2028. Agreed. And says Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been one of the best current Treasury Secretaries we have had.
Yeah, he was a surprise to me because he used to work for George Soros, so I've been keeping a real close eye on him, but I've been fairly impressed with him overall. And maybe the fact that he worked for Soros, he knew the inner workings of a lot of these networks and where the money ran.
Yeah. Holden says, Danny will cape to Wellington Street just like always. Jeffrey Wolf says, I'm back to be sarcastic again today. Thank you. And says, will the Democrats be for real successful in the United States? Hopefully they'll do a great job for Canada too.
And again, Trump has almost $1 billion to spend in these midterms, and they haven't really begun spending them yet. There's supposed to be a huge Republican convention that's going to kick off, I think, a lot of the money spending for the midterms. The Democrats have nothing. A matter of fact, the Democratic Party is negative because of what happened with Kamala Harris. They never recovered that money. Nobody's donating to the Democrats. They have George Soros and they have big money donors from overseas in China right now, but they need to smuggle that money in. How are they going to do it? Maybe they're going to do it through Canada.
Jeffrey Wolf says, yeah, sorry, the Democrats do a lot of shady things to hurt the U.S. economy right before an election. Mm-hmm. So you only need socialism when your economy is bad. Bad economy equals more socialism. Bad economy equals more socialism, which equals more Democrat votes. And Jeffrey Wolf also says, if China gets to use Canada and the European Union gets to use Canada, why can't the Democratic Party use Canada?
Democratic Party is definitely using Canada, and I think they're starting to take control over Canada, and Mark Carney is literally hiring them in. And I think his masters ultimately lie in the EU, but I think they're the ones placing those people there. And his administration created a whole new office called the PMO's office to hire that individual from the Hillary Clinton campaign.
Yeah, K4U says 118 Fahrenheit is 48 degrees Celsius. That's insane for heat. K4U also says it's a projection backspeak. If they blame you for Russia interference, then that's what they're doing, and they end up telling on themselves.
Yeah.
Confession through projection, as the once great Robert Barnes used to say. PBE says, this is your version of CNN nut jobs, just copy and paste liberal American nut jobs. Yep. And says, I ask people every day about the, quote, trade war, and people look at me like I'm crazy. Canada isn't even on Americans' radars. Your government is running a psyop on you.
Well, Canada's not on America's radars yet. But what happens after the midterms? Maybe Trump's going to make it a point to put it on Republicans' radars, especially the MAGA party's radars, and maybe he goes into a real trade war. This isn't a real trade war. This is a made-up trade war by Mark Carney to leverage for the midterms, possibly to leverage for federalization and other things. After the midterms, Donald Trump may put an end to these games and really go hard.
And PB also asks, who exactly are these middle powers that Carney says want to attack America? Where are they? They're in Europe and China and Canada, apparently, as well. Holden says, oh, this is interesting. Holden says, it would be great if Mexico were the ones to tear up the USMCA and then announce a bilateral deal a week after the 6 months are up.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to figure that that's what's going to happen right now. I mean, Canada really had an opportunity. I was surprised at the kind of deal that they were being offered. The Americans are really letting it leak out because they are pissed about this thing. They thought this was going to be a small bump for the midterms, and Mark Carney made them believe and then pulled out at the last minute because he wanted to catch them by surprise.
And John B says the Democrats are underwater for funding because they don't have USAID and their usual mechanisms to move money around.
Well, they have George Soros, which is about $100 million, but they also had somebody else that was trying to funnel about $800 million, and that is a billionaire from China. Problem with that is the Trump administration got wise to that and directly went after that individual that was trying to funnel money in from China.
Mm-hmm. But now let's get into what's happening over in the elbows up east, because the mainstream media has been telling Canadians essentially that Orange Man bad, elbows up, this is the worst thing that's going to happen for Canada, and we have to stick together. However, they continue to negotiate just in secret without really telling the Canadian public what's going on. Canada. And so let's start with this from Mark Nixon saying, quote, the Liberal story is already falling apart. Tim Hodgson says Canada had 3, quote, red lines saying sovereignty over who we trade with, protecting French and bilingualism, manufacturing competitiveness, except Canadians deserve the full story, which I don't think they'll get.
Well, sovereignty over who you can trade with, they're talking about one individual country, and that is China. It's the same standard they set for Mexico. Mexico had to start acting on that, kind of trying to clear out Chinese manufacturing, which was ingrained in the country. Once they did that, they were able to get into official negotiations and build different mechanisms into those trade negotiations so they weren't subject to future tariff threats from the American administration.
And yet, for example, the USMCA Article 32.10 already places conditions on pursuing an FTA with a non-market country. Canada must notify the US and Mexico before negotiations, disclose the full agreement before signing, and entering such an FTA allows other parties to terminate the USMCA on the 6 months' notice. That clause has existed since Canada signed onto the USMCA and also applies to Mexico and the US themselves. Second, Canada announced a preliminary trade agreement and new strategic partnership with China in January, but Ottawa's public material describes the arrangement rather than providing Canadians with a complete negotiated agreement showing every commitment made, which might have been one of the big sticking points during these negotiations. So release everything, exactly. Quote, third U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer has now explicitly rejected the claim that Washington was attacking the French language, alongside with Trump himself.
Well, and let's get into the clip. The clip's going to be very interesting because the Canadians absolutely love secrecy when it comes to the negotiations. The Mexicans, on the other hand, give daily readouts on exactly what they discussed, and they tell the general public through, her daily telecasts exactly what's kind of going on there. The Canadians love to use propaganda and kind of sit the narrative of Orange Man bad.
We're not going to talk about, and we're not going to negotiate through the media. We didn't negotiate through the media when we worked with Alberta. We didn't negotiate through the media when we worked with Quebec and Newfoundland to get to the largest single investment in Canadian history, and we're not going to do it now. What the Prime Minister did very transparently was say to Canadians, we have some red lines. We have a red line on sovereignty. We will not let another nation tell us which countries we can do trade deals with. We have a red line on the fact that we are a bilingual country and that French is a founding language in this country. That is a red line. And we have a red line around competitiveness of our manufacturing sectors. We will not accept a deal which fundamentally undermines the competitiveness of our manufacturing sectors. But we will negotiate, and I want to assure Canadians.
And pause it for a moment. You're not going to have a manufacturing center if this trade war goes on. All the investment Mark Carney keeps touting coming into Canada of $100 billion, almost $50 billion of that is from mainly Americans buying out Canadian companies. And I believe they're going to move those companies to the United States. We're going to see the hollowing out of Canada if this trade war continues.
Minister and Minister LeBlanc and Ambassador Wiseman and Trade Ambassador Charette, who are singularly focused on making sure we get the best possible deal for Canadians.
And yet it doesn't seem like they actually really care about that. And it's ironic, myself being from Mexico, to say that the Mexican government are the ones that are being more transparent than the Canadian one. But that just shows you the dire straits and the evident propaganda that has been going on. And I've also seen a lot of people on X writing full-on letters to the US administration asking them to be transparent with what Canada rejected because their own government, the Canadian government, won't tell them.
Well, absolutely. The Americans should release that. We'll see kind of what happens. And I think after the midterms, there's going to be big moves happening there.
Exactly. But also, we saw that Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, really wanted to get Trump's attention, even though he's a conservative and should be against Carney. He seems to be fully aligned with this elbows up strategy that they're using. Mark Nixon says, quote, Doug Ford wanted Donald Trump's attention. Well, he got it after Ford threatened to cut off electricity and critical minerals to the United States. Trump responded by personally tearing into him and calling his rhetoric bluster and warning that the consequences for Canada could get far worse.
Well, and before you read this, I want to say I put this in. This happened a couple of days ago, but Doug Ford was on the news making a statement, and he looks like a whipped dog at this point. So let's read the initial statement, and then let's see his reaction after Trump kind of called him out on this.
Yes, Donald J. Trump says, quote, lots of bluster and blubber from Doug Ford, who is Premier of the Canadian province of Ontario, but who is better known as the less charismatic, intelligent, and overall unimpressive brother of the late, great Rob Ford. America has been carrying Canada for decades, but no longer. The USA will always be far bigger, richer, and stronger than Canada. No lies there. Without the United States, Canada couldn't survive. It's why they get all their money. It's where they get all their money from. And because of their current bad leadership, primarily Governor Carney and his flunky Ford, they will not be allowed to keep taking advantage of the United States. They're key to survival. Remember, much of the electricity, oil, and gas that Canada gets is transported through the USA. Someone should get these clowns to, quote, fall in line, or the consequences for Canada will be far worse. Canada's unemployment rate is now at 10% and rapidly rising. Their businesses are fleeing for the United States, and it's all because of their failed policies and inept leadership. The days of ripping off our farmers and other businesses are over. Thank you for your attention to this matter, Donald J. Trump.
Well, when you compare Doug Ford 1-for-1 to Donald Trump at least knows these Canadian pipelines pass through the United States, and he has the ability to cut them off before they hit the east coast of Canada. Doug Ford was completely surprised by this, which is shocking to me because this is simple, basic information, especially if you want to make threats about cutting off energy.
Exactly. But he seemed to change his demeanor a little bit when he had to talk to the U.S. media that doesn't just bow down and bend over for him. Juno News says, quote, things got a little heated. Ontario Premier Doug Ford moved to cool tensions with President Trump after trading personal insults on Monday, saying it's time to get back to the negotiating table. However, his master, Mark Carney, said he didn't want to and that the trade war will continue and the reciprocal tariffs will stay up and that there will be no talking. So what's he on about at this point?
One thing I want to kind of point out here, and it's a little bit early on, especially if these trade wars continue, but look how the American commentators are kind of asking the questions, because we're going to show another clip after this with Olivia Chow, and it's very telling how the commentators kind of ask the questions.
It sounds like your frustration with President Trump and his tariffs policy.
And we're going to get it going here in just a minute, I guess. They're not.
Wiser to take the temperature down a bit right now between these two longtime great allies?
I think so. Wolf, things got a little heated. It got a little personal yesterday
No, I think
between
it's
the
a clip
president and
itself.
myself.
It sounds like your frustration with President Trump and his tariff
Okay,
policy
we go to the
against
next
Canada's
clip if you want
escalating.
with
Would it be
Olivia
wise to
Chow.
put
Yeah,
the
it's not
temperature
really
down a
working.
bit?
So yes, let's get into how another big person that has been very elbows up lately and essentially just full on for wokeness, Olivia Chow, has also responded to questions when asked not from the cushy offices of CTV and CBC, but from even CNN. Ryan Grierson says, quote, "At every moment, Canada looks like a colony of idiots." CNN had Olivia Chow on to discuss the trade war, and it goes exactly as you would expect it. She references Dolly Parton, and she basically agrees that cutting off electricity to the U.S. would be a good decision by Doug Ford.
Well, and another thing here, this is CNN, so this is the Democratic station, and the way the commentator kind of asked the question a couple times and implying you might not want to make threats like this to the United States is very telling. And it says to me, if the Americans eventually do start paying attention to Canada and to get their elbows up, it's going to mean absolute disaster for the Canadians. This is a one-sided fight because the Americans don't actually believe they're in a fight yet.
Don't understand it. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, has come out very hard against the President of the United States here. The Wall Street Journal had a whole profile on him this morning and writes that he's clearly getting under the skin of the President and the White House, but also writes this, Ford, his unpredictability complicates Prime Minister Mark Carney's negotiating stance, but he also provides a useful foil, a kind of bad cop for which Carney can offer his more measured good cop approach. Do you think Doug Ford's approach complicates things for the Prime Minister negotiating?
Well, that's a very good question. Look, this uncertainty is costing us. It's costing everyone. And when the price goes up...
And pause it for just a second. They couldn't have got a dumber politician from Canada. I'm surprised she agreed to do the interview. This makes Canada look horrible. She's going to start out here with a complete non-answer, answering a completely different question she made up in her own head.
Let's continue seeing the mayor of Toronto.
No one is exempt. And I think what we should do is follow Dolly Parton's way. She lived her life full of love and joy and generous, and President Trump could reflect on it instead of these midnight schoolyard bullying and the vicious. Just take a breather. And my message to American viewers is this. This is senseless. There's no reason for this kind of attack. Our economy, our auto parts are so integrated, and that's why we're prosperous. So give your local elected rep a call and say, come on, you're supposed to love your neighbors as yourself, but stop the attack. And
that's a complete pre-canned answer to a question that was never asked.
Let's negotiate. Let's talk, because we're always stronger together.
Let me ask the question then this way, because I didn't hear an answer there. Doug Ford also told the Associated Press that if this fight gets worse, the way he put it is everything is on the table, including cutting off electricity from Ontario going into the United States. Do you support that move?
Well, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. Upping the price of electricity, we have to get attention, because this cannot continue. The uncertainty is costing everyone. And I have this, and we as Canadians are having a...
And she was not ready for that question. And you could see that silence. And then she went for it. She forgot she was talking to an American, even if it is a Democrat. You're threatening cutting off energy. You're threatening American lives at that point.
Buy local, love local campaign. There'll be two apples. One's from America, one's from Canada. We're going to buy Canadian
right,
apples.
But proactively cutting off electricity going into the United States, you would support that move as a measure to get the US to the negotiating.
Well, and she talks about both those apples. Yeah, they're going to buy Canadian. They're going to pay double the price for an apple grown in Canada, which is absolutely insane. It's cheaper to buy meat from halfway across the world in Australia. If we can go back to that clip real quick, if it's still working.
Oh, no, it isn't.
Oh, okay. Let's keep going.
That's why I moved on. But that's it. So with all this, it's good that the Americans are able to see the unseriousness of Canadian politicians and what they actually are used to, the kinds of questions that they're not used to and can't even answer. Start talking about Apple, start talking about Dolly Parton, but can't say if she said that she thought it was a good idea, but I don't even think she was ready to even say if she thought that that was a good idea or not.
Well, no, but the American commentator was shocked by her answer. I don't think she was expecting that answer. That's why she re-asked the question. question, and the clip went out, but they re-asked it again, and they don't think it is a good idea. And I think she wasn't prepared for that interview whatsoever. I mean, again, she is the dumbest politician in Canada.
And the elbows up east will continue and will continue to prove, hopefully on American media as well, so Americans can see that they don't have any idea of what they're doing and that this war that they're waging is essentially unilateral on their side, on their part, and actually just hurting Canadians themselves. But before we continue, please don't forget to subscribe. Again, it really does help us out. Thank you. And now let's go back to your comments. I'm running out of voice there, sorry. Let's go. Let's start with... I really had to cough. John B says, Alberta boomers need to get wise to Mark Clowney. The Alberta boomers need to think with more than their brainstem. Well, it's hard because they only have that one. John B also says, her looks alone give a bunch of attention. Yeah. And also says, Olivia Chow is not smart. Well, that is the understatement of the year, but exactly. Jeffrey Wolf says, bad economy equals more socialism equals more Democratic votes. Yeah, and that's what helps and has helped the strategy, not just in the US, but also obviously clearly in Canada. Don Alex says, hi, NNG and everyone else. Hello, and thank you for being here. J-Man, hello, says Mark Carney. Mike Ciarni should be fired. Oh, yes, you should. But at this point, he has a majority, so it's kind of hard to get rid of him. Beulah Hillier says, hi, Don. Hold on. And Chris Calgary says, I've lost faith in Canadians ever waking up to use their useless, ineffective government. To their useless, ineffective government. Yeah, so did we. That's why we left.
Yeah, we already voted for our independence. Alberta has an opportunity not for individual citizens to be pushed out of the country, but to take part of the country and make your own nation. So... if you don't live inside of Alberta, either move to Alberta to vote for freedom and independence, or it's time to book it.
Packing.
Make a run for the border, I guess.
Yeah. Chris Calgary also says our entire media in Canada is basically propaganda for liberal governments. Exactly, which is why these politicians aren't used to speaking clearly and obviously and evidently when they're actually questioned by even CNN and Wolf Blitzer, which I wouldn't even say are hard journalists that go after the truth.
Well, yeah, it was very interesting that even the Democrat anchors were getting a little bit upset there when they said they would cut off energy. So I think that is a huge tell. It's a tell enough where if this trade war continues, it is a possibility that Donald Trump could rally the Americans to actually get their elbows up and crush the Canadians at some point.
Which again, as I've been seeing from a lot of these rallies that JD Vance has been holding, even Marco Rubio talking about how it's important to start focusing on America and that there's, especially in the states that border Canada, saying, well, you have been taken advantage of for too long. So I think they are using this opportunity for that.
Well, America is like that sleeping giant right now, and Canada is really just poking it. They are so lucky nothing's happening in return. After the midterms, though, if something does happen, that would be the end of Canada. I don't know how Canada would survive it if they took it seriously and the Americans put their elbows up as high as the Canadians are from day one.
Yeah, Chris Calgary says, let Quebec go. Well, Quebec said they don't want to vote on independence until after Trump is gone, so they're losing their own opportunities because they relied on politicians to do all their independence moves.
Well, actually, in the next section, we have two main stories. One is about Jamil Javani, and the other one is going to be about Quebec. I'm kind of going to dive into that, and it looks like their politicians are selling out their independence movement currently.
And J-Man says, Mike Carney is bad. Yes, he is. And Chris Calgary says, Quebec is a giant strain on the rest of Canada with their constant demands. So ridiculous that we put up with it. Yeah. And A2.0 says, can't watch the show right now. Just come in to like. Thank you so much, A2.0, if you watch it later. Thank you. Chris Calgary says, Ford should just cross the floor. He is not conservative. He is an embarrassment to this nation. Interestingly enough, he is one of the first ones. I would have said, oh, he's going to cross the floor soon. And yet he still calls himself conservative.
Well, I think Mark Carney likes to have him have that conservative label so they can play good cop, bad cop with whatever they think they're doing right now. The only reason they're able to do anything is because the Americans have been busy with geopolitics all over the globe, and they haven't really been paying attention. They thought the Canadians were just going to come to this trade deal, and so they offered them a good deal, saying this could be a bump before the midterms. And then Carney thought he's going to play games. We're going to see how those games end.
Yeah, Chris Calgary also says Doug got his position because of Rob, his brother, is such a failure. Yes, that's the only reason why he's there. Because they kind of look alike. Chris Calgary also says our media cannot ask questions. They are given the scripts from the PM's office. And which is why it becomes even more obvious when they go on CNN of all places.
Well, and it's very interesting. You said they're given the scripts from the PMO's office. Who's running that PMO's office? It's the Democrats from the United States Carney recently just hired a bunch of them in.
Chris also says we have some of the most useless DEI people in government in Canada. Voters are so ill-informed and only concerned with appearances, not substance, and they don't really care about who they're voting for. They care about the color and what it says on the ballot.
Oh, absolutely.
People don't look into it. There's too many people to vote for in Canada.
Yeah, and I will say we have been starting to clip the show, each individual segment, and post it in our videos. If you do see them, give them a watch, give them a like. If you do miss the show, you can watch any one of the segments. I think the last couple of days we posted 2 of the segments. We're going to start trying to post all 5 segments.
Holden says Doug Ford is an embarrassment, absolute buffoon, and a national embarrassment. Oh, yes, he is.
I think every Canadian politician is a freaking national embarrassment at this point.
Rage Against Machine, hello, says quote, our greatest wealth is not what lies beneath our soil or within our banks, but what lies within our people, their courage, their labor, their ideas, and their willingness to stand together. Alberta has a lot of that. The rest of Canada, not so much.
The federal government doesn't give 2 shits about the Canadian people, and we can see that right now. And this is why Alberta needs to break free. Alberta didn't put its trust in a freaking politician like the Quebecers did, who are now getting betrayed by those politicians. This is a grassroots citizen-led movement, and so far so good. After we get past this binding referendum, the federal government's going to wake up and say, oh, we can't give them a binding referendum. We have to be prepared for that moment. If they do that, we need to be ready to make a unilateral declaration of independence and said freedom or nothing here.
Chris Calgary also says Chow is a hypocrite. She is no doubt buying American with Costco, Walmart, Home Depot, Amazon, liberal bozos. And most people that just say, oh, I'm just going to buy all Canadian and never go to the U.S. don't even know where the products that they consume daily come from. Most of them, or a lot of them, from the U.S. or at least with U.S. influence or U.S. companies.
I think Chow's buying Canadian because buying Canadian means buying Chinese these days.
True. Chris says Alberta independence is the only option. Yes, it is, which is why we're so behind it. And we continue to see it as that one beacon of hope within the disaster and downfall that is Canada. J-Man says we should boycott Canadian goods. If you're in the States, I mean, yeah, you could start. There's not many to boycott. There's not that much to boycott. I mean, industrially there is. But Chris also says, I'm Canadian, but agree with the U.S. crushing us. It's the only way for the Eastern liberals to stop their nonsense. But they won't. I mean, in a different era, I think it would have worked. But at this point, I think they're so far and have their elbows shoved so far deep up Carney's behind that they don't even notice it.
There's 2 things. I believe in Alberta independence, and I think America is going to have to break the backs of national Canada in order to wake them the hell up. They're so far into ideology, they can't see their nose for their face at this point.
Chris Calgary also says, you're so right. Carney has Ford in his pocket, and he must have big pockets because Doug Ford is pretty big.
Well, and you can see him courting Danielle Smith, and I think they're telling her to have that position until after this non-binding referendum. And if the non-binding referendum doesn't turn out well for the Federalists, they're going to tell Danielle Smith to keep that position, because if she has the Canada First strategy of let's cut off the oil through Alberta, they know that's going to push more people to the polls in Alberta. So they at least want Danielle Smith having a different line than the rest of the politicians in Canada.
J-Man says, I've already cared about Canadians. It's hard to at this point. Hold on, where were we? J-Man says, CNN is trash, and even that trash network was able to stump Olivia Chow. That is the level of intelligence that lies within that head. Mm-hmm. And the stupidity that lies within that.
Well, she had that pre-canned answer, and then they go, you didn't answer the question. Let me ask it again, but let me show you what else is happening here. And then she was thrown for a loop, and she goes, yep, we're cutting off energy. And the reporter was like, what did you say?
Yes. Ray Davis says, why is the political operative in a foreign government working in the Prime Minister's office with a scrubbed history, no less?
It's not just one individual working in the PMO's office. They're getting a ton of consultants. It's almost looking like the Democrats are running the midterm campaign through Canada.
That might have been the idea since the beginning of that PMO's office. Holden says, I love that when our politicians go on far left networks like CNN, and even they look at them like they are mentally challenged. Exactly. I mean, CNN looks, what's it called? Like they have some kind of competence compared to when they're interviewing Olivia Chow.
That's insane.
And that's the level we're at right now. Rage says, it's another quote, the creator gave us the dignity of freedom. It's our responsibility to use that freedom wisely, protect it faithfully, and pass it forward.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's nice. That's kind of what I think we're doing. I hope we're doing. John B says, Republic of Alberta now. Yes. And J-Man says, Alberta's going to win. Well, I mean, with all of this, it's getting closer and closer.
The only way Alberta doesn't win on October 19th with these games that Mark Carney has played with the working class of Canada is if they got this thing rigged. And we can see there's all kinds of interference happening in this Alberta election, as well as the Canadians interfering in the American elections. It looks like what they're best at is interfering in elections. Forever Canada isn't having to show the receipts where they're getting any of their money. They're saying we're going to need 60,000 workers. We can't hire them out of Alberta. We're going to have to get them from different provinces, potentially non-citizens. This is going to be ridiculous.
Chris Calgary says, absolutely, Danielle will be out in October if she doesn't toe the line for her constituents that voted her in. The majority of Alberta Conservatives want independence.
We need to get her out, even if she says she's going to toe the line and put an election in the spring, because her original statements was 2.5 to 3 years. And then when she was getting booed and jeered in public, she said, okay, I'm going to give one in the spring. She's going to continue to say the spring, so we don't have a leadership review on her. And then the federal government's going to come with a challenge, and she's going to, oh no, I got a challenge. We're going to have to delay it 2.5 to 3 years like I originally said. This is how we got ourselves in the situation of a non-binding referendum. It should have been a binding referendum right from the beginning.
And over on our UMBLE, oh, there's quite a few, so let me read some of them at least. Hold on. PB says, no, I read that one. It says, didn't Soros say he's not funding the Democrats anymore, or was that a lefty lie as usual?
Oh, no, he's funding them. Actually, Biden funded, I think it was $500 million before he left office, and now that's meant to be funneled back in for the midterms.
PB also says, I've dealt with Canadians in several different sectors, and you guys can be very, very nasty, arrogant, and condescending to Americans. I don't understand the hate, and it's all one-sided. Yes, it is, and it comes from years, decades of this programming from the federal government to essentially try to make Canada better than it is by using hatred against the U.S. to stir up some sort of pride, but you're also not allowed to be proud of Canada.
Canada's not a real country. It descends from Great Britain, and Canada still has a king, and the king of Canada is King Charles from Britain. So the relationship with Britain, they still hold that grudge against America.
Oh, and thank you so much, Rage Against Machine, for the $10 super chat, and says, that's not a quote, it says, keep up the great work. Nice to hear from like-minded people. Blessing to you all. Viva la Republic. Yes, and thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and always with great quotes.
Yeah.
That apparently one of them, he said that he was able to, what did he say? He forced it out of ChatGPT, but it's really good. So whatever you forced was great. John B says, Danny is bad. She likes messing with Albertans and doesn't like listening to those that voted her in, and wants to ask questions during the referendum, for example, of things that she already said she was going to do. Sorry, that annoys me a lot. Holden says, my anti-America boss asked me yesterday to keep an eye out for his Amazon package because he was heading out to Costco to pick up a few things. You can't fix stupid, not even with duct tape. And there's many like that. That's the irony of it all, that they're saying, oh yes, elbows up, we're going to go against America, while they continue to consume and be fully enveloped by America and American politics. They care more about American politics than what's going on in their own country, or why it's going on. Okay. Now let's actually head into the other side of the coin, which are the Conservatives, which the Conservatives in Canada could be using this trade war that Carney is waging as a leverage point for themselves and as a way to differentiate for themselves from... But
No, it's going to be about Jamil Giovanni today, actually.
I know.
Okay.
That's what I was getting into. Let me start again. The Conservatives could have been using this whole trade war that Carney is waging against the U.S. as a leverage point for themselves, but they've decided to put their elbows up, except for one or two people, one of them being Jamil Giovanni, who is now being called to leave the Conservative Party because of his different stance.
Now, a party election broadcast by the Conservative Party.
Oh, the guy. Oh, he never understands where I'm going with things. First, let's start with Bruce McGonigal saying, quote, Pierre Poilievre delivers a grim report on the suffering of Canadians. This begs the question, with food prices so high, why are our dairy farmers dumping up to 1 billion liters of milk every year? If you wanted to bring down food prices, wasting 1 billion liters of high-quality Canadian milk is the exact opposite of helping. Exactly.
Well, Pierre Poilievre has it bang on the money. The problem is, He's saying you have to wait 2 to 3 more years for another election so you can vote for me so I can make the changes. Alberta Independent says, no, we're going to make the changes. We have a grassroots movement that's almost identical to a lot of the things Pierre Poilievre is saying. A lot of the things Pierre Poilievre actually liberalizes on, Alberta Independents won't liberalize on. We're going to make the change for ourselves on October 19th.
Our people have suffered enough over the last 10 years. Raging inflation has made it impossible for many to afford groceries. Single mothers are forced to turn back items at the grocery checkout because their bank accounts empty before their grocery carts do. An entire generation of youth is shut out of home ownership as we have the most expensive housing in the G7. And then there's the people who have to empty their bank to fill up their tank because of high gas prices. Factories have moved south. Jobs have left the country. 30 mills have already closed in British Columbia. The people who used to donate to our food banks are now forced to take donations because they can't pay their bills. And now the highest number of insolvencies since the Great Global Recession means that families are literally selling their homes and assets to pay their mortgages as they toss a turn at night, wondering if they might have to declare bankruptcy.
Well, it's great he knows the problems of Canada because everybody can see it at this point, but he doesn't have a solution because he doesn't have any actual power. Alberta Independence does. The people can now make the change for themselves. They no longer have to trust in the politicians.
And also with Pierre Poilievre, everything he says is bang on the money. I mean, it's right that Canada is sinking. It's right that a lot of people are suffering. And yet he decided to go along with the elbows up tactic when he could have used it as leverage for himself and as a way to differentiate himself from the Liberals and from Carney.
One thing I'll say here, I'm glad people of Alberta aren't trusting in Pierre Poilievre anymore. They've kind of seen through that. We're going to show in the second half of this segment what's happening with the PQ and how they're betraying the independence movement of Quebec.
And as I was saying regarding Jamil Jivani, for example, Ari Erasmus has, quote, fired Jamil Jivani now, saying that there's a petition to Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Parliamentary Caucus saying that we, the undersigned, call on Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Parliament to immediately expel Jamil Jivani from the caucus.
Yeah, and you can leave this up here. This was all over the internet. I just grabbed one of them. There was other ones that had a ton of likes, a ton of comments, things like this. This is absolutely ridiculous. Jamil Jivani is, for a politician, the best you're going to get at this point. He actually has a relationship with J.D. Vance. Maybe you should be leveraging that instead of going to war with the Americans. But I guess if your goal is to interfere in the midterms, you're going to want Jamil Jivani out.
And this is a change.org petition, which I mean is taking things a little bit seriously at this point. But to further explain, Paulette Banana says, quote, I never said treason, but don't believe me. Here's what JD himself had to say, saying, quote, saying Prime Minister Mark Carney tried to out-tough U.S. President Donald Trump while crediting his longtime friend, Conservative MP Jamil Jivani, as a helpful advocate for Canada.
Well, and leave this picture up there. They've been friends for a long, long time. This is something that you should use to your benefit, not try to get rid of the one guy that actually has a long-standing real friendship with the Vice President of the United States, who's very likely to be the future President of the United States.
But it also shows why these tactics from the Conservatives that are looking exactly almost the same as the elbows up technique that Mark Carney has been using isn't going to lead them anywhere, because they could be the party that wants to negotiate with the U.S., wants to improve the relationship, wants to mend it. And yet, well, all we hear from Pierre Poilievre, all we hear from the rest of the Conservatives, mostly, also the commentators, is, no, we also have to put our elbows up. No, we also have to hate on the U.S.
Well, they're saying we have to have a Canada first approach. That means dollar for dollar tariffs, this and that. Jamil Jivani is one of the few politicians in Canada that has a different outlook on it and actually has a relationship with the vice president. The only other politician is Danielle Smith, and you have to question those motivations. It seems like she's in the Federalist pockets right now, and she's taking an opposite stance only because she doesn't want to push more people towards polling for independence on October 19th.
And yet you're not allowed to mention it or even try to do what makes the most sense at this point, especially for a conservative party in Canada. But On the other side, all the way over to the east, Western Standard says, quote, Parti Québécois vows no referendum while Trump remains president.
Yeah, and the PQ is absolutely looking dazed and confused these days. They're not looking like the normal PQ, and it looks like they're getting real friendly with the federal government. They were claiming they were going to have an independence referendum really quick off the bat. That would have set a lot of good precedents. Now they're saying, well, not till after Trump is gone. They don't know how to deal with this. This used to be a good, confident young leader. This is why you do not put your trust in politicians. This is why Alberta independence went down that road before of trusting in politicians. And this time we said, no, this is a citizen-led grassroots movement, and we're going to make the change for ourselves. We're not going to trust in Danielle Smith, Pierre Poilievre, Mark Carney, Doug Ford, the PQ, you name it. The politicians are on that side. It's the citizens on this side, and the citizens are fighting for freedom.
But it's almost ridiculous that many people within Canada, including its own politicians, know more and care more about U.S. politics, which just shows the actual influence that the U.S. has and how important it really is for the Canadian economy and for Canadians just in general. But it's insane that they care more and know more about U.S. politics than they do about what's happening in their own country or why things are happening or asking for transparency on the trade negotiations that broke down, for example. No, they won't ask for that, but they'll ask to wait until Trump is out of office because apparently he's that important for Quebec's independence movement. However, Mark Nixon says that's the entire problem. The Parti Québécois says the French language was not being threatened in the U.S. trade negotiations. How would Canadians know? We haven't seen the deal.
And we can go right into the clip here. I mean, he looks dazed and confused. 1 minute he's saying, no, the New York Times is saying this. We don't know what's going on. Yeah, we know what's going on with the PQ right now. You're saying, oh, we're not going to have a referendum on independence. This is why the people are supporting you in the first frickin' place. And there's all kinds of deals going on behind the scenes with a lot of investment coming from the federal government directly into Quebec. And now all of a sudden, you don't want to have an independence referendum. And this is why Alberta independence had the right outlook right from the beginning, that the citizens fight for freedom, no longer trust in the politicians.
This is a leader of the Parti Québécois, the more independence party within Quebec, Pierre Saint-Pierre Plamondon.
We learned this morning in the New York Times that the French language in terms of having products in French were not at stake according to that article. So, as Yves-François Blanchette just mentioned before me, there's an obligation to say the truth when you speak about important things like that. But what it tells in terms of Quebec politics is that Christine Fréchette told Trump no way about the French language, but actually her own Minister of Culture cannot tell anymore what's true because nobody's at the table. We don't have the information yet. It is our interest at stake, and that's a problem.
And he just looks like a politician. He used to be a young, charismatic, confident politician. He looks like he has no confidence. I think backroom deals have been made at this point. He should be calling out the federal government directly, not mada. Oh, we don't know what's going on. No. Say it like it is. The federal government needs to release what went on in those trade negotiations, number one, and he needs to be talking about independence. He's talking about the opposite of independence. Oh, we can't have any independence until Trump's gone. Trump has nothing to do with Quebec's independence, period.
And with the lack of transparency coming from the federal government, from the Mark Carney Liberals, but also with the lack of interest even from the Conservatives in saying, well, release the deal, with Pierre Poilievre just still complaining, but also putting his elbows up, now with people wanting to fire Jamil Giovanni because he is trying to have a relationship with the U.S., or at least thinking that might be a good idea. This is all getting insane, and this is why a lot of Canadians have fully lost hope at this point, except for Alberta, that can get its independence soon. But don't forget to subscribe again. It really does help us out, and like the video. Thank you so much. And let me go back to your comments now, because there's quite a few.
One other thing I'll say about Jamil Giovanni here, it really does look like there is a uniparty forming, maybe not on cultural issues. I'll say definitely Pierre Poilievre, I side with him on the cultural issues. But when it comes to federalization and a lot of other things, I think they're trying to get the Conservatives and Liberals directly in line on very specific policies. And if anybody is stepping out of line like Jamil Giovanni, they're talking about wanting to get rid of him. Absolutely ridiculous. I don't like politicians generally, but Jamil Giovanni's the best you're going to do for a politician at this point.
But let's go back to comments. Raging as Machine says the USA is our best trading partner. This is ridiculous. We don't have a government. Exactly. You have a government that's looking down towards the US and cares more about what's happening there and involving themselves in those politics than their own people, their own country, what's happening within Canada. They're either looking down at the US or over at Europe and China. That's all they do. Rage Against Machine says, then we must change their minds. Well, I mean,
the only way to change their minds is to vote for independence on October 19th, period.
J-Man says, thank you for reading our comments. Well, I always say that's the whole point of having a live, being able to interact and have the conversation with the audience too.
Well, and our audience size is right around where we can read all the comments still, which is very, very nice.
But do subscribe, please. It does help us out. Jeffrey Wolf says, Canadians hate Americans because it's been 33 years since they won the Stanley Cup. Then maybe get better at that. Get better with your economy. Get better with your healthcare. Get better with paying salaries. Get better with increasing the economy. And stop blaming others for your own issues.
Well, if Alberta breaks free, Canada's definitely not winning the Stanley Cup at that point because the Oilers and Flames are coming with Alberta.
Ray Davis says, why unqualified, incompetent MPs all speak as Rhodes Scholars and Chatham House operatives working with Democrats in the U.S.
And yesterday we actually played a longer diatribe about how a lot of the roads lead to the city of London from the Promethean Action Group.
Don Alex says to Jeffrey, you could be onto something. Yeah. That's what we said. Philip Espa says, Pierre is spineless and weak, just like how the UEFA dropped their boycott of FIFA. Nothing but performative uniparty BS. Did you include that? Because you know I like soccer. But yes, exactly. It's just bullish, brandish words, and then they just, oh no, sorry, when things get too serious, no, we didn't mean it.
Yeah, and again, I definitely see a uniparty forming here, and I think Mark Carney is going to build all the mechanisms, push it as far as he can. I don't think he wants to run for another 3 years. I think he has bigger plans for himself. They're going to have the Conservatives probably finish off federalization in Canada and have everybody kind of cheer it on.
Loeffner with a half-right comment, I would say, says, PP is a clown. Yes, who wants to sell out Canada to his buddy Trump? Pierre Poilievre hates Trump. Yeah. And this is the reason why the Conservatives have done so badly, because most, I would say, some at least conservatives in Canada hoped that the Conservatives could show a different relationship with the U.S. And no, they've been forming this uniparty, putting their elbows up.
Well, actually, Pierre Poilievre's ex-girlfriend advised him not to go down to the United States and not to take a lot of phone calls from the American administration as well as different American media. And that soured the Trump family on Pierre Poilievre. Now, if you want a different approach to America, Pierre Poilievre's not going to be the man to do it. You're going to have to put somebody in there, either a Jamil Giovanni or a Danielle Smith or something that can change the relationship there.
Loeffner also says the cons never offer any solutions. They offer them, they never implement them. It's Carney who is defending Canada and PP wants to sell it to Trump. Again, Pierre Poilievre is right there alongside Carney. That's the problem most actual conservatives have with him, at least myself.
Yeah.
I don't speak for all conservatives. Chris Calgary says, I was such a huge Poilievre fan, but no more. I'm done with the uniparty. They support the ridiculous immigration and climate BS. And many other things they voted on where they sound great. They sound like they have their morals and their values aligned. But then when it comes down to voting or actually doing things, especially now that they lost any kind of importance because Carney has a majority, it turns out that no, they actually don't really matter that much.
I was a big Pierre Poilievre fan as well, and I still agree with a lot of his opinions, but he slowly liberalizes on certain issues I'm just not willing to liberalize on, number one. And when it comes to the big major issues like federalization, I think he's right in line with the liberals. And that's what I talk about when I talk about a uniparty. It's not that they're aligned on every single issue. It's that they're aligned on the big issues. They allow cultural issues to be debated here to make it look like there's a difference while they move forward with this big federalist plan.
Loeffner is very active. Says Alberta will never vote to separate. It's the only the rule voters that want to separate the cities will outvote the separatists. Want to bet?
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Especially now that the Liberals have fully shown what happens when you stay in Canada.
Well, I'll tell you this. I watch liberal media. We brought this up a lot. A lot of these liberals that have their elbows up, that want a trade war with the United States, are actually talking about moving to the United States openly on YouTube, which is crazy for the benefit of their family. Because even though they want a trade war, they don't think Canada can win a trade war.
It shows a full-on retardation.
Well, and conservatives have been bailing on Canada for years now. That's why Poilievre's numbers keep going down. The Conservatives can read the writing on the wall, and more immigrants are being brought in every year. This is why Mark Carney is able to maintain his poll numbers, and Paul Young's poll numbers are going down.
Loeffner is just telling on himself here. Sorry, we have a bit of time. We really want to respond. Saying to Chris Calgary, without immigration, you will not have CPP, the Canadian Pension Plan, or healthcare. Number one, how good are those things actually doing? And number two, that just shows you the fact that this socialist system, quasi-socialist system that the federal government and Canadians are very proud of, does not work if you actually decimate your own population by telling people, oh, be feminist, oh, don't have kids, oh, the climate change, and now you have to import a bunch of people to work low-wage jobs, essentially slave wages, so you can continue to have your CPP and your healthcare while saying that you're doing this to be generous. No, you're not. You're doing it to uphold your own systems that are breaking down because they don't work.
The only reason the CPP exists is because of Alberta. Alberta is the one floating the entire thing. And I've suggested, as well as a lot of people in Alberta suggest, we need to keep the money we send the federal government for the CPP in the Alberta bank accounts to help Albertan banks. The federal government won't even allow that to happen. And we need a premier in Alberta that will take action on small things like that, exposing the federal government for their federalist nature.
Do you know where a lot of your CPP money was invested and then lost all that money? Do you know how much money has been lost from the CPP investment arm and how badly it's being managed? Probably you don't. That's why you're so proud of it.
Well, Mark Carney is gambling with the CPP straight up, and he's losing that bet.
Just shows a full-on retardation of the elbows up. But Canadian Spider-Man, hello, not retarded, says hello and good evening. Hello, thank you for being here. Philip Espa says, Pierre is also the cause of Canada's destruction. I'm in shock that there is a campaign to kick Jamil out. He is the best you're going to get.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. I don't think they want to kick him out. They want to threaten it, and they want to get him in line because he's the only one talking about a different way to approach America. I mean, Danielle Smith is as well, but Danielle Smith, you have to think it's forced because she can't take the Canadian approach. That will push more people in Alberta towards independence vote on October 19th. I think her position is taken because she's told to take that position.
Beulah Hillier asks, why is he so negative? Because he's elbows up. And Loeffner also says, Jamil supports Trump over Canada. He's a traitor. This talk will just get you to continue to decimate your own economy and eventually have to move to the U.S. yourself. Even though you hate them so much, you know that that's where the actual opportunities are because Canada doesn't care about Canada or its own people.
Yeah.
And traitor.
I mean, China, Ursula von der Leyen, all the people in the EU, they will be using Canada more than the United States ever will. But I guess you're okay with those masters.
J-Man says, not true, Alberta will vote for separation. Yes, they will. Ray Davis says, who doesn't understand the definition of treason? Liberals. Or Libidiots.
Okay, let's go into the last section here.
Hold on. Loeffner says, you don't have the votes. Even the CPC and UPC majorities want to remain. Who are you talking to? Who have you got this information from? Philip Espa says, the president offered Canada a deal of a lifetime. Carney is foolish to reject it. Trump is saving the Western world.
Well, let me explain one more thing to him. We actually own the UCP memberships. It was a strategy of independence to buy up memberships. We're continuing to do it to this day. We own over 60% of the UCP, and we are the active 60%, meaning the independent side shows up at every meeting. We control Danielle Smith's future. We're going to have a leadership review on there, and we're going to get somebody within that position that can guarantee a binding referendum and buck whatever the federal government says.
Responding to trolls is sometimes useful because as we're getting into this segment of the economic cliff, it helps to preamble it with the stupidity that comes from the other side. Oh, no, that's not the button I wanted to press. But as Canada continues to hurl down full speed, apparently, towards the economic cliff with this trade war against the one-sided trade war against the U.S., because the U.S. doesn't really care at this point and is actually going to full-on benefit eventually from it, well, Canadians continue with their elbows up and thinking that this is the greatest idea ever, and they'll just continue to hurl down towards that actual economic cliff. Let's start with this from Wealth Moose, and maybe spreading a little bit more truth. Wealth Moose says, quote, Canada spent a decade telling itself capital would stay.
And let's wait 1 minute. I grabbed this because this is a ton of money leaving Canada, and this is primarily just the auto industry. All the other industries, they're starting to get hollowed out as well. We haven't even really begun the real trade war, and the real trade war is going to really start after the midterms. That's when you're going to see the economic devastation happen. Right now, elbows up is smiles. When you go off the economic cliff,
yeah, the reality is here, this is a reality that they don't really want to talk about when they talk about how good Canada is doing. RBC says $1 trillion plus left between 2015 and 2024. Now the auto sector sequels with Honda, 15 billion suspended, GM Cami, 2 billion shut down, Umicore, 2.7 billion paused, Northvolt collapsed, Brampton production shifted south, Oakville EV plan was scrapped, and Oshawa shifts cut.
there's not much of an auto industry left in Canada after this.
The pattern is getting hard to ignore. Government subsidizes the announcement. Capital rethinks the project. Jobs disappear. Taxpayers inherit the risk. Canada doesn't have a capital problem. Capital has a Canada problem. That's just why they're leaving with their elbows.
Well, and this is how the Canadian federal government and Mark Carney wants it. This is how you get federalization. You put onerous regulations as well as a trade war to keep investment out. And then you have the government handing out bailouts to private companies for percentages of those companies. That's what I suspect is going to happen. Also in the natural resource sector, they're the only ones willing to put up the money because of the amount of onerous regulations on that natural resource sector.
But let's see what the international talk is on Mark Carney. Jasmine Lane says, quote, all he has is Trump derangement syndrome. That's why he's prime minister. That's literally how he won with his elbows up tactic. International News says, what is Mark Carney on about for the ones that are kind of paying attention to Canada?
And even the international media has this thing bang on. It's the Canadian media that won't tell the truth. And this is why the Canadian people, or a large portion of the Canadian people, continuously have their elbows up. And that means a dark, dark future for them.
Because Canada's media is subsidized almost in its entirety at this point by the federal government. So it's the propaganda arm that lets them brainwash the people as to what they should be thinking and how high their elbows should go.
He's likened his country's tariff tiff with the US to a full-blown war on trade. He even said, we were attacked, you're at war. When you get attacked, we got attacked, that's fine. We've got the reserves, we've got the resilience, we've got the plan, we've got the focus, we will respond. And of course, it's prompted a rebuke from President Trump.
We're at war. You are lucky the Americans aren't taking the same approach to Canada. If they ever do, that is it. These are fighting words from Mark Carney. He is lucky the other side has not decided to fight yet.
Accusing the northern neighbour of trying to secure the benefits of being a state without being one. Look, I feel like there's always been a bit of tit for tat between Canada and the US. But, you know, what is Mark Carney on about, do you think? It really, is it this deep?
You'd wonder why he would get into a trade war when Canada is completely dependent on the U.S. in terms of trade. I mean, and it's not the other way around. I mean, so we don't need Canada. Our exports to Canada account for 1% of GDP. Canada's exports to the U.S. are 17% of their GDP. So, and by the way, they have a pretty respectable trade surplus. The surplus country always loses in a trade war because they're more dependent on their exports. So he's just getting into a fight because all he has is Trump derangement syndrome. That's why he's prime minister. The Conservative Party was up 20 points in the polls. Granted, I think President Trump might have made a mistake by getting into that spat with him because, that's why he ran on an anti-Trump platform. And that's what got him elected. But it's not good for the people of Canada. Their GDP per capita.
And again, the midterms are coming up. Maybe the Democrats are thinking somehow we can orchestrate an elbows up campaign in the United States. Absolutely ridiculous. Canada is being used as a mechanism against the United States, not only in the midterms, but possibly the 2028 election.
Is 30% less than U.S. GDP per capita. And a generation ago, it was almost equal. So, the Trudeau Carney policies have wrecked that country. And it was basically a lost 10 years, a lost decade for Canada under Trudeau. And now we're going to see more of it, maybe even worse, from Mark Carney because he hates the president so much.
And because he thinks that that's a great strategy to take because that's what got him in. But at this point, I don't know if I have enough hope in Canadians to fully realize what is happening.
We wouldn't be in this situation if it wasn't for Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney advising Justin Trudeau. This isn't just a couple years of Mark Carney. Mark Carney has been there for a long time now.
And yet we do have more experts, more people actually in the thick of it, trying to say the truth.
Yeah, this is the meat and potatoes and the crux of the issue here. We can go right into the clip, but man, I really feel for the people and the working class of Canada.
RMZ86 says customs broker Alyssa McEwan shares some truth behind who really pays for the tariffs.
Does that just halt the trade altogether?
No, because I mean, I had a lot of shipments that left on Friday, got picked up in Canada, and are going to be delivered on Monday. So which means that everyone that thought everything was fine, their goods were going to be covered under USMCA on Friday, got hit with a 50% tariff with goods already moving. So they can't do anything about it.
And so now they have to pay that tariff, which if
yeah.
you're...
So for instance, I had like a $300,000 machine that left on Friday, got released in the US on Monday. So that's $150,000 that they owe. And there's no way of going against it.
Well, let's talk about that, because we were always told that American tariffs are paid by Americans and these Canadian counter tariffs will be paid by Canadians. What is your practical experience about who is absorbing the cost?
So for the US side, it's usually Canadian manufacturers. It's, small businesses. I have a client that imports sweatshirts into the United States. He's been okay recently because everything's been covered under USMCA. But now he's going to be hit with a 50% tariff, and like most industries don't.
And this is the fact for most countries. Most countries have been eating the tariffs, except when they can't, and a very small percentage of that tariff is actually eaten by the American public. On the other hand, a country like Canada that is extremely small eats the entire tariff. A tariff war for Canada is going to be devastation. Unlike for the United States, it works in the two different economies differently because the size of the market of America.
And the benefits that having that market within America brings to everybody that is trying to import things, which is why they eat the cost, because they'd rather have the market than lose the market and lose the actual profits that are higher, usually, than what the tariff would be.
Operate at a 50% margin. Now, so they're going to be crushed.
Why is the Canadian exporter paying when it should be the American importer?
So most exporters act as what's called a non-resident importer, which means that they basically handle all the importing costs. So that way, when they sell it to their U.S. client, it's a landed cost to them.
So they're playing both sides of the equation and then have to try to basically get more money when they're selling that product in the U.S., which I suppose might not be possible.
Yeah, so like I would say 80% of my U.S. Importers are actually Canadian manufacturers. So they're the ones that are paying. So the Canadian economy is going to be paying the U.S. tariff. Most small businesses' cash flows can't sustain this at all. So for instance, if you import something into the United States, 10 days after release, you owe the Canadian government all that tariff. And on the Canadian side, at the end of the month, you have to pay anything that was imported within that month. So any tariffs, duty, GST, everything has to be paid up front. Otherwise, you get penalties and interest. So like for a cash flow standpoint, like that's crippling.
Yeah, because if you, to use the example of the $300,000 machine, you're saying who has $150,000 cash flow just sitting around?
Yeah, in 10 days. And if you don't pay it, then you get a penalty, then you get interest, then you can't import anymore. Maybe they seize your property. Like you're talking about governments not getting paid, right? At this point in time, like everyone,
you can leave it there. And that's the real cost of the tariff war for Canada here. A lot of people just don't understand. They think, oh, the tariffs are going to hurt the Americans. No, they're not. And they haven't from the beginning. They've hurt the Chinese economy actually immensely in the tariff war.
And that's the problem with this strategy of elbows up and just saying, oh, we hate the U.S. The U.S. is the worst. The U.S. is doing all, because who really gets hurt, who really ends up having to pay the cost and pay the price of Mark Carney's waging a war on the U.S. and walking away from the trade talk negotiations and table is the Canadian people themselves. And yet those that yell elbows up, we're not consuming any American products, don't understand or don't want to understand and to actually see who will get hurt is their neighbors and their fellow citizens. But next, Marty up north says, quote, called it. Carney just announced $11 billion for 6 icebreakers to be built in Levi, Quebec. There are no private investors willing to invest in Quebec, so the government has to step in. By the way, if man-made climate change is real and the ice sheets are shrinking, why does Canada need 6 new icebreakers?
Yeah, everything he says here is bang on. And this is one of the things you really start questioning the PQ in Quebec with when you say, oh, we're not going to have an independence referendum anymore until after Trump is out of office. And then you're handing out massive contracts. This is just one of many from the federal government actually financing directly, because private investment won't touch Canada right now and definitely won't touch Quebec.
And might go to further prove and further show how a plausible potential federalization and nationalization plan might go once investment dries up, once Canada becomes untenable for anybody outside of Canada itself to invest in things, well, then it has to be the federal government that steps in with taxpayer dollars, which eventually dry up because in socialist and communist countries and plans, the money eventually goes away and you have to end up as Venezuela and Cuba usually
Let's go into this one because this one was very interesting to me. A lot of people have been posting this, but it is so true, even though it's a meme.
Marty Up North says, quote, Canada in 2026. We have Mexican wages, Swiss prices, Swedish taxes, Indian services, Russian infrastructure, North Korean censorship, and Venezuelan leadership. And that is the state of Canada at this point. And you have to start asking and questioning yourself. You've been told for your entire life that you live in a first world country. Does it look like a first world country anymore? Is it being led as if it were a first world country with, trade agreements with places like the US? Or has it been slowly and now fastly turning into a third world country, but you can't notice because you don't even have enough money to go to the potential third world countries you're being compared to that are actually doing better than Canada at this point?
It's not a third world country yet, but we're going to see a first world country enter a collapse if they continue on this path, especially with mass immigration.
And that's the sad reality of it all, that the people that do want to continue on this war with the US don't even think or consider that this could be hurting their fellow Canadians. And yet they will still keep putting their elbows up and saying, let's go against the US, and not understanding that they're actually going against themselves. Don't forget to subscribe. It really does help us out. And also like the video. It does help us out a lot. And now let's go back to your comments because I see there's a lot of them and there's a troll in the building, which I'll continue to respond to. J-Man says, Iran does not run anything. I don't know if they're fighting against the troll or amongst themselves. Rage Against the Machine says, economic independence and political liberty are likewise connected. People who create wealth but surrender control over their property, labor, resources, and financial affairs possess only a partial independence.
Alberta has much more culturally related to the United States than they do Canada.
Closer culture to the U.S.
Yeah.
John B says, Pizdor Pierre is a total clown and is not even conservative. Rage Against the Machine says, well, we are being replaced and taxed to death. Can't afford to live here anymore. Our own beef is retarded expensive. Yes, it is. And
that's why you're buying it from Australia. Which is crazy.
John B says, once Alberta takes off, a new trade pact will take shape between the Republic of Alberta and the United States. Yes, that's the whole point as well. John B says, well, I live in America and live in Arizona. Lofner, we will see. This is the troll. Talking to the troll. We will see what happens in October, but if Prime Minister Clowney turns out more, the vote to separate will push harder. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's also something the Elbows Up crowd don't understand. They're just helping make the case as to why Alberta should be independent.
Well, this is all fine. I think Mark Carney's going to realize he's not going to allow that binding referendum to happen. And that's why a unilateral declaration of independence is going to become crucially important as a last resort measure for Alberta.
Teresa Freedom says, those icebreakers were first announced in 2019. That's not a new contract. And yet, once again, the government stepping in as they have to do in many socialist communist countries. Chris Calgary says Trump is doing his damn job, unlike our politicians. That's what they don't understand. Philip Vespa says to Lofner, you will be forced to, as well, when the economy collapses, to move to the U.S.
Yeah.
And that's the saddest part. Those that had said elbows up the most will probably be the first to go across the
border.
border.
A lot of people aren't going to be. People that are politically engaged are already leaving to the United States. We see the number of conservatives exiting the country. Even liberals are talking about it at this point. They're exiting now before the economic collapse happens and the Canadian dollar is not worth anything. They have money now to move to the United States. In a year or two, the Canadian dollar might be worthless.
And the troll Lofner in the building says, Trump's tariffs are hurting his own MAGA economy.
Oh, yeah.
Are they? Troll in
No
the
tax on
dungeon.
tips, no tax on Social Security. Okay.
Yeah. Jeffrey Wolf says, I don't think Trump was even at the table of the negotiations. I'm sure it was an underling. Trump's pretty busy.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was, what's his name?
But now they got the attention of Trump. And if they keep this up, and they don't cut a deal before the midterms, after the midterms, there's going to be consequences to pay. There's going to be hell to pay.
Chris Calgary says, lol, get a grip. We have always had immigration. However, they opened the borders 11 years ago at an unsustainable rate. Our infrastructure and institutions are not able to handle it. And that is the main issue. Before, Canada used to have one of the gold standards of immigration and how they used to check and verify in the point system, etc. And then Trudeau completely collapsed that because he said, oh, GDP is more important than actually having a prosperous country. turning into the third world is better than continuing to be in the first.
Well, and you have to realize a lot of these immigrants from the United States, they're looking at Canada or they're looking at Mexico because the United States isn't the friendliest right now to them, especially if they're illegal immigrants. So if J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio get in 2028, a lot of these immigrants might try to wait Trump out, like Mark Carney's trying to wait Trump out. But if J.D. Vance and Rubio get in there and they continue going after illegal immigrants, they're going to look for the Canadian border as their way out. And Canada is willing to give them hand over fist money to come into the country.
Yeah. Mona O'Brien says, I supported Pierre since he announced that he ran for the leadership race. I went to his rally during the election campaign. He really disappointed me. Alberta independence is the only way out.
Yeah.
And same here. I mean, we have videos on our other channel that used to be our English channel, now is a Spanish channel, talking about when Pierre got elected and then what strategies and plans, and use social media and actually maybe cooperate with the U.S. if Trump ever gets back in. Maybe that would be a good idea. And yet here we are. Jeffrey Wolf says, America is so good at trade wars, we didn't even know we were in one, and we're still winning.
Absolutely.
Exactly. J-Man says, USA and Alberta are going to do great things together. Yes, they will. The troll, Lofner, says, Alberta will never separate. You don't have the votes. Again, do you want to bet? Also says the cities vote Liberal or NDP. The cities have the votes.
We got the votes, and you're going to see in the non-binding referendum that we have the votes. The independent side will have independence. The thing with Mark Carney, he's not going to want to let this thing go to a binding referendum because the independent side does have the vote, and we do have the motivated voters on top of that. That's why a unilateral declaration of independence is very likely in this situation if Mark Carney doesn't allow a binding referendum to take place.
Chris Calgary says, I love this guy. Spot on. Carney offers nothing to Canada. I'm guessing that guy in the Australian TV. Ray Davis says, by the time Carney is done, the courts, House and Senate will be so corrupt and the country so broke, the WEF will take over imposing their contract loads. Exactly. And the troll says Trump is crashing his own economy. MAGA has splintered. MAGA has splintered because some people decided to go and get money from diverse interests that really want to see America fall and wage jihad on it. Hold on, my nuts. Thank you so much. Oh, I said the full name. I always try not to say the full name. Holden. I will have to cut that out of YouTube. Thank you so much for the $5 super chat saying, gotta go, love you too. Keep up the great work and fight for freedom. Thank you for being here, even though you have a very hard name to not say on live on air. You got me to say it, and it was while I was reading your super chat. So there you go. Thank you so much for being here and for the super chat. I was trying really hard not to say the full name, but I said it this one time. Where were we? But thank you so much. Lofner says Trump attacked Iran and he betrayed his political base.
Well, I'm going to say this. There's not boots on the ground. It's not an expanding war. It's a limited engagement, and they're not escalating the matter militarily. They're escalating economically, despite what the woke right said. And what the woke right said is there's going to be a draft in 3 weeks. They said that 2 freaking months ago. And they said, we're going to have boots on the ground in the next week. And that was 2 months ago. Absolutely ridiculous. This is a limited engagement, and he's going to break Iran's back, and he is not going to back down because of the midterms. And I think the Iranians were game planning, the midterms are coming up, he's going to have to back down and give us what we want. No, he's got a long-term strategy here to economically break the back of Iran. He doesn't have to do it militarily. This is a limited engagement at this point, nothing more.
I love that our American viewers, thank you so much, are telling Lofner, who keeps saying that, Trump is, my economy is doing horribly, the MAGA economy is collapsing, and they're all telling him, no, it's not. We live here. No, it's not. For example, Ray Davis saying, I don't see the economy splintering. We are growing. And Jeffrey Wolf says, what? MAGA is stronger than ever.
Yeah, sometimes we get an elbows up Canadian in here, not realizing we support Alberta independence and a free and independent nation of Alberta and the United States of America under Donald Trump's vision to make the Western Hemisphere the golden age.
Yeah, Lofner saying Trump's tariffs are hurting the USA. Your economy is crashing. It's Americans paying more for the tariffs. Are they? We just showed you an example of someone that does that every day, has to deal with the border situation and then border controls and etc. with import-exports, saying, no, it's actually Canadians that end up paying both tariffs, essentially. But
well, here's the thing. You have the woke right, you have the DSA on the other side, you have the Democrats, you have all these people trying to put out propaganda. And everybody can see what's happening for their own eyes. Unless you live in Canada, you have your elbows up and you listen to the mainstream media. There's plenty of Americans in the chat telling you how it is in America right now. And if you compare dollar for dollar America against any other economy in the world, I'm taking America. And that includes against China. For the first time in decades since Trump took over in this second term, they've been outperforming China on their GDP, period.
Also saying, the troll saying, MAGA has splintered. He invaded Iran and betrayed his whole base. Trump is bleeding votes for the Democrats. You are too online, and you probably consume either Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, or one of those retards, or the opposite on the liberal side. But
wait, go vote for Tucker Carlson because he was too scared to even announce his party because the people aren't with him and they know they're trying to fracture the votes, and it's a psyop from the Democratic Party themselves.
Well, but also, sadly, a lot of people on the Carney liberals and the elbows up crowd are believing a lot of the things that the online commentators on the retarded right are saying, that Trump is losing a lot of support, etc., because of the war. He's actually not. And there's been actual polls and actual people being interviewed out in the real world saying, no, I don't actually really care about it.
They're weaponizing Canada against the United States. And with all of that they're trying to do right now, we'll see what happens in the midterms. Well, is Trump going to lose seats? Is he going to gain seats, or does he stay the same? I think he's going to stay the same, or he's going to gain seats there. I don't think you've seen anything from the Republican Party yet. Again, they're having a convention coming up, and after that convention, it is game on.
Ray Davis says the tariffs create a fund and contrast the low Canadian dollar. Exactly. Chris Calgary says Canadians are all surface fluff. They vote like it's high school popularity contest. It's embarrassing. The Liberals want to decimate all businesses just like they did during the Jibby Jab era.
Yeah, they want to turn Canada into China, and China is communism.
Lovner says, half of all Republicans are screaming for Trump to end the tariffs or hurting Republican states. No, they're not actually. Again, because usually for other economies to enter the U.S. economy, they're willing to eat the cost of the tariffs and the importation costs just so they can enter the market that will pay a lot more in the long run for whatever product they're trying to sell.
This isn't a new idea. This is how the United States used to function.
Yeah,
and the fact that there's no tax on tips, Social Security, and all kinds of other things, private property tax, they're trying to go after that in the state of Florida now to totally get rid of it. Trump wants to make that a federal thing. If tariffs are successful, you're going to see a lot of these taxes come down. And as far as manufacturing goes, they are building facilities as fast as they can get them up right now. $19 trillion being invested.
John B says, no one gives an S about Iran. Trump is surgically doing this in Iran. Not a war either, so don't push that BS either. And Jeffrey says, that's crazy. Almost every MAGA-backed candidate has one. You need to stop watching CNN. CNN and Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes and all the retards too. Because again, this online conversation that a lot of Canadians, that's the only thing that they consume instead of actually asking real Americans on the ground what's happening, or at least calling one up or trying to engage in a conversation. They only listen to both sides that are saying the exact same thing to try to get rid of Trump and MAGA, etc., without looking at the reality.
And we don't just talk about Alberta and Canada. We also talk about America. We got a whole show called American Greatness. And I'll tell you, tomorrow's show is going to be interesting because there was a bunch of small elections yesterday. And who won? The candidates that Trump endorsed. And the woke right went totally against them. They thought that was the race they were going to win, to kind of plant their flag in the ground. And they lost it by 6 points to a candidate that had zero experience.
Lovner about those icebreakers says, private investors don't invest in Coast Guard ships, LOL. Private investors invested in the shipyard. Clueless people. These are government ships, not privately owned ships. They were trying to get private investment because the government didn't want to have to pay for it. You retard. Oh my God. Sorry, I have to stop fighting with trolls. John B says, and who builds those ships? Private companies.
And let's just say they're giving out bailouts right now, just like it was the Jibby Jab era in Canada because of the tariff war, and it hasn't even begun. Once we get into the third and fourth rounds of these bailouts, what's going to happen? The federal government's going to continue to give the bailouts for percentages of these companies. And that's how you get socialism as well as communism. And they already have the natural resource sector cornered with the amount of regulations in Canada. Foreign investment or outside investment is not coming in for pipelines or anything else. It's the federal government financing this. And this is federalization in its purest form. This is communism coming to Canada.
Jay Wolf, an American, says, no, it's not Republicans winning. It's MAGA winning. Republicans nominate losers for the last 30 years, and MAGA chooses winners.
Well, what you're seeing, and I think the midterms are going to be the complete shift here, is you're getting rid of a lot of the Rhino Republicans, and now the Republican Party is MAGA, which is absolutely fantastic. It's a whole new set of values.
And again, it's crazy that these elbows up Canadians know and care so much more about MAGA and the Republicans and what's happening in the U.S. and going against the U.S. and knowing more about their politics and what's happening in your own country, and why you will have a much you and your family, and if you have kids, I mean, I feel really sorry for them, will have a much tougher time in the next 5 to 10 years than you ever had to, and that the Americans will.
Okay, let's continue on if we can.
That's it.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
That's why I'm reading comments.
Yeah, let's go. No, we'll go over to RUMBLA.
Oh, but there's so many more comments left. Hold on. Chris Calgary says, in Alberta, we are not the
we'll
same.
We'll go 5 more minutes with comments, and then we're going to head over to RUMBLA for some stories that are too spicy for YouTube.
I knew we went long. Chris Calgary says, in Alberta, we are not the same as Eastern Canada at all. We would rather work hard and take care of ourselves. Liberals want UBI and the government to daddy them. We need to get our house in order.
Absolutely. And yeah, we'll leave it there.
Then they were fighting about the icebreakers. I'm just trying to go to the best comments. Hold on. Jeffrey Wolf says, the American Navy is always sailing the sea. It doesn't cost us any more money if they are parked over in Iran. And that's another point I forget to bring up, the military investment that the U.S. has done in protecting Canada, and the fact that Canada can't even protect itself and does fully depend basically on the U.S. military. And now they're also willing to break with that, even though they don't have a backup plan.
They got free protection. The reason they got socialism ingrained into their society so freaking deep, and they want a welfare state with UBI and everything else, is because they've been able to have so much extra money because of the Americans defending them. They haven't had to build a real military. The same thing happened over in Europe. And now they're seeing, oh, we don't actually have a real military. We can't actually fight the Russians. We thought we were going to take their natural resources. I guess we'll just draw closer to Canada. We'll federalize their natural resources, and that will be Europe's bailout plan.
And hold on. Lovner says, even Trump Republicans are coming out against the tariffs. And hold on. Where are we? Chris Calgary says Candace has lost her mind.
Those aren't Trump Republicans coming out against the tariffs. That's the woke right that's being paid by Qatar, China, the Democratic Party. People that are real MAGA supporters know, vote J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio in 2028 because we want to continue the long-term game plan to take the country back, to bring manufacturing back, to have a golden age, not just for America, but for the Western Hemisphere, maybe excluding Canada, considering they want to go to war with America economically here. At least that's what Mark Carney says in his own words.
Chris Calgary says Candace has lost her mind. It's hilarious, but sad at the same time. And probably getting paid and being used as more than just a retarded content creator. Beulah Hillier says, great, John, I'm Canadian and I love Trump. I love Beulah Hillier. Hold on, where were we? John B says, you're right on, guy. We call it the Hamiltonian economic system.
Yep. Absolutely. And they have been teaching that in school. That's why a lot of these Democrats say everything Trump's doing doesn't make sense. This is against economics. No, it's actually a system, and the United States used to adopt it.
There really is no fixing stupid, is there? I already explained it multiple times to you, Lovner, but you don't seem to understand. Says, it's simple. In Canada, conservatives are trying to sell out to Trump for nothing. It's Carney standing up for Canadian workers. The conservatives are doing the exact same thing. Why do you think people in Alberta want to leave Canada itself? Because there is no hope either with the conservatives or the liberals. The conservatives are right lockstep with Mark Carney and his stupid trade war, saying the same things of elbows up and we have to protect Canadian sovereignty, which is why a lot of people have lost interest. Why do you think 400,000 people plus have already left Canada? Because they don't see any future there. God, people are stupid. I should do a live stream by myself, just reading comments. And Ray David says, good riddance to the floor crossers too. Exactly. And that just goes to prove the point that the conservatives and liberals are basically the same side of the same coin. That's losing value. And Ray David says, same as the Fabians, we didn't have a clue until Trump. But now, finally, we're going over to RUMBLE. RUMBLE, I will read your comments over there. You can find our username down right here. The Troll, Lovner, if you want to come with us over there, we can keep fighting if you want. But we will see you in 30 seconds there. Don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube. It really does help us out. And thank you so much to everybody that is still here.
Let's get ready.